Welcome to Zim Papers Television Network, ZTN. Of course, this is Diplomatic Passport. Certainly, yesterday we had an action-packed day when we had that whole day of debates. And of course, I'm sure you missed us, but certainly you got a dose of us on another program and on another platform. We return today with Diplomatic Passport. My name is Robert Mkondiwa. Of course, we shall start by taking a look at where Zimbabwe stands with regards to our COVID-19 statistics as availed to us by the Ministry of Health and Childcare before we get into today's show, where I'm joined by two guests who I'm sure you're going to get a lot to learn from. So let's take a look at those statistics. Zimbabwe now has 9,038 confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus, including 273 deaths and 8,288 recoveries, which puts the national recovery rate at 89.5%. Of course, that's a fall. 555 PCR tests were done in the last 24 hours and 88 new cases were recorded. And these are all local transmission cases. Of course, Harare is still the epicenter with 3,348 cases, followed by Bulawayo, which now has 2,016 cases of COVID-19. Of course, they've now hit the 2,000 mark, and that is something that is not enviable. They had managed to steer their ship a bit well. Of course, we even saw 4 deaths coming from Bulawayo and 1 from Masvingo, and that is something that we need to take a look at as we try and rein in those statistics. And talking about COVID-19 and hope, though, there's hope in a vaccine. So recently, the world woke up to news of a vaccine for COVID-19, which in its early days literally had put the world to a stop. Now, speaking during a media briefing on COVID-19, World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus pointed out that no vaccines in history have been developed as rapidly as for COVID-19. But most importantly, he called on those responsible for the distribution of vaccines to apply the same level of urgency and to distribute them fairly. Let's hear what he had to say.
With the latest positive news from vaccine trials, the light at the end of this long, dark tunnel is growing brighter. There is now real hope that vaccines, in combination with other tried and tested public health measures, will help to end the pandemic. The significance of this scientific achievement cannot be overstated. No vaccines in history have been developed as rapidly as this. The scientific community has set a new standard for vaccine development. Now, the international community must set a new standard for access. The urgency with which vaccines have been developed must be matched by the same urgency to distribute them fairly. Every government rightly wants to do everything it can to protect its people. But there is now a real risk that the poorest and most vulnerable people will be trampled in the stampede for vaccines. That's why in April, with support from multiple partners, WHO established the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. The ACT Accelerator has supported the fastest, most coordinated and successful global effort in history to develop vaccines, diagnostics and therapeutics. More than 50 diagnostic tests are being evaluated and new rapid antigen diagnostics are being made available for low and middle income countries.
Well, certainly he's right in that in the world we have not seen, this is actually unprecedented. We've not seen that development of a vaccine so rapidly as we did this particular vaccine. And we've got a number of organizations which were rushing towards that. Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline. We had a number of people saying they wanted to work on a vaccine to ensure that mankind is protected going forward. And of course, we've come up with that vaccine. Well, what it is a vaccine and obviously treatment and a cure is usually a marathon and not a sprint. But in this case, the world sprinted towards that particular vaccine. And it waits to be seen if others will not be trampled in that stampede for the vaccine by the countries who are eagerly awaiting that the vaccine hits home and that they can safeguard their populations. Now on to another theme, very important, something that we kept pushing on about yesterday, and it is the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Now, the world tomorrow will start observing those 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and they'll have a range of activities from November 25 to December 10. And this year it will take place under our 2020 global theme, which is Orange the World, Fund, Respond, Prevent, Collect. Now, as the world retreated inside homes due to lockdown measures introduced to curb the COVID-19 pandemic, reports showed an alarming increase in the already existing pandemic of violence against women. Now, accompanying the crisis has been a spike in domestic violence reporting at exactly the time that services, including rule of law, health and shelters, are being diverted to address the pandemic. Now, to speak on the issue and joining me in the studio is Ms. Roswitha Mdarikwa, who is with the African Women Leadership Network and the disability sector in that network, and also Duduzile Matema from the Women's Institute for Leadership Development, and that is wild. And I want to say I spent a bit of the afternoon with you as you were deliberating, and you have come from different areas. Roswitha, tell us a bit about you, your organization, and what brings you here, as it were.
Good evening, Robbie.
Yes.
And good evening, viewers of Diplomatic Passport. I am with African Women Leadership Network. We were in a workshop where we were getting training in media because we believe media plays an important role in development issues. So we were being trained how to engage with media so that we can put across our messages. Because as AWLI, African Women Leadership Network, our core business is advocacy. And we definitely need media to support our work. So for the past 2 days, we've been getting training in how best to pitch our stories and be able to engage communities so that together we can address the challenges that affect women in general and women and girls with disabilities in particular.
Oh, thank you, brilliant, and it's a pleasure to have you here on Diplomatic Passport. And Duduzile, all the way from, you're coming from Bulawayo, and I do know that your organization, I'm pretty sure you've gotten this a lot, Women's Institute for Leadership Development, WILD. I'm sure that has raised a lot of eyebrows. Now tell me about your organization and what it is that you aspire to do.
All right, thank you very much, Robbie, for having me, and good evening, viewers. My name is Duduzile Matema, and I work at Women's Institute for Leadership Development. In short, we usually refer to it as WILD. And most people usually assume that probably it's got something to do with wildlife, but no, it's got something to do with leadership development, particularly for women. Because what we envisage to do at WILD is to ensure that we build capacities for women who've got a desire or a wish to actually find themselves in leadership spaces. So basically that's what we do. We host trainings in leadership development. We work towards empowering women economically. We also ensure that we tackle issues of democracy and governance, particularly focusing on women. So that's what we do at WILD.
Well, then there's quite a lot that happened against women, especially we look at women and they're already plagued, as it were, by an even playing field. And you're talking about empowering women economically, especially. But a lot of those gains were rolled back this year when COVID-19 came. A lot of women, the economy in itself took a knock, and a lot of things to do with, human rights, women's rights especially. We've recorded more domestic violence figures. How has this affected you? How did COVID-19 directly affect you as an organization, Duduzile?
It's been really sad and devastating what COVID has really done, particularly to our programming at WILD, because in the past we would actually go to communities, because we don't only implement in Bulawayo. One thing for sure you should know is we implement in Plumtree, we're in Kwanda, we're in Lupane, we're also in Umzingwane. So the ability to move was restricted, meaning the ability to reach out to women that we actually usually used to reach out to became impossible for us to achieve. So meaning what we had to do was to have a backup plan. It didn't mean that our programming actually went dormant, whereby we actually decided to stop programming. We didn't stop programming. We had to be innovative about our programming in terms of actually using the structures that are on the ground in the areas that I just mentioned previously, whereby they actually ensure that they implement programs wherever they are, try and stick within the confines of COVID and the restrictions that were there at the time in terms of the numbers that were allowed in meetings, things like that. But it's been really sad because we've also been reading around the hike in domestic violence, gender-based violence, and it's really heartbreaking, the fact that women are actually the number one, or rather the soft targets when it comes to gender-based violence. And it's really sad because in as much as we hear about the statistics, we read about the statistics, we're actually alarmed by those numbers. But there actually are the numbers that are there that are not reported,
absolutely.
Which is actually sad, and you actually feel that there is something that needs to be done as a matter of urgency.
A lot more, certainly.
Yes, that's true.
And Roswitha, you talked about how you want also to even the playing field. We're looking at 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And of course, we're also looking at you trying to empower women. But it's bad enough being a woman in a patriarchy that we're living in already, but then to also be a person living with a disability, that makes your mandate even difficult, and that makes your position even difficult. But how are you engaging other women to become allies? Because we've got different challenges, certainly, and one woman who's able-bodied, as it were, may not understand your challenges, but how are you also empowering other women with the knowledge to show, so that they become allies to assist you in your push?
Thank you so much, but you know, with women in the women's movement, it hasn't been so much difficult to build alliances because of where we are coming from and because of the common goal that we have in the women's movement. So it's like the women have experienced, they have experienced what we have experienced, and they are always prepared to support, because at one time they have also had that experience. But maybe what I might also want to say is that we are each other's keeper. And when we approach women, they are prepared to listen. And they also feel that by bringing us on board and by protecting our interests, they will also be doing justice. What I am reading, the script I'm reading from the women's movement, is that they want to lead by example. They don't want to be going against the principles or the issues that they have been advocating for. So in actual fact, I think I'm happy to say that we have received so much support from the women's movement, and they are prepared to listen, and they are aware that everybody needs assistance. You just need to know how best to assist. And I think I applaud the women for always consulting us and finding out from us how best we want to be assisted. So our work has been, you know, an easy work because of their preparedness to consult and be prepared to hear how best we want to be assisted and how best we also want to participate in advocating for our rights. And you might also want to know that during working hours, I'm also a teacher and head of a school. So I am always with girls, and most of the times I find myself having to listen to the girls and having to counsel them and having to assist them how best they can move on with their studies. So it's like over time we have gained the confidence of women, and we hope that with the alliance that we have built with women and girls who are able-bodied, we can still continue and build alliances with other players and other stakeholders of society.
Well, you mentioned something interesting. I didn't know you were a school teacher, in your 9 to 5. What is it in Harare? Tell me about that life as a school teacher and the challenges that you come across and some of the gains that you've won. For example, you talked about how you also counsel women and girls who obviously are not always some will be able-bodied, and you'll also be teaching them about interesting and valuable life lessons on even tolerance and acceptance. Tell us about that life that you also lead on the side.
Yeah, I'm a teacher and head of a school in Masvingo. That is, I'm in the peri-urban area. I'm not in the city. I'm slightly out of town. And I think I have been in the mainstream since 2002. And what I have learned is that maybe my being a teacher and being in the mainstream was also some kind of advocacy, because what I am doing is also convincing people that persons with disabilities can also perform just like anybody else. I think they are the very people who can confidently say that disability doesn't mean inability, because I've been with them and I have worked with them, and I think over time I've gained their confidence and they believe in me. And I believe each time when we get visitors or when community has got some concerns, I always find my learners, providing answers. So it's like with advocacy, you don't have to be speaking out everything, but sometimes you will have just to live amongst them, and you perform according to their expectations. And sometimes it's so soothing, so comforting to hear them answering questions, which, under normal circumstances, I think, would be a challenge. And wouldn't be understood by somebody who has got vision. But I hear them, they speak so well, they are actually advocates at my workplace, and sometimes I don't even have to explain myself because they do it for me.
And I want to tell you, as you were speaking, I could see Duduzile melting. And Dudu, you've been working in the women's movement, and sometimes you think, well, I've been around a lot of women, and I'm a woman, and I've probably I know almost everything there is to know about being a woman. But listening to Roswitha speak there, I saw you get this flash and a new moment. What's going through your mind as she speaks? Because she's talking about how she's also inspired certain people, but certainly I saw she inspired something within you.
Okay. One thing you should know about when it comes to women's rights movement, is that you learn something new every day. In as much as I work at a women's organization, you notice that every passing hour of the day, I learn something new. I understand a new concept. I get to understand that, okay, this is not how I'm supposed to do things. I have to adjust in this way so that it suits a particular context, or it suits a particular background, whatever it might be at that particular time. So I would say, from listening to what Roswitha was saying, you can actually see that she is doing a lot, especially working with women and girls, being able to connect with able-bodied people, which is actually commendable. It is a commendable effort, because when we're looking at issues of gender-based violence, you notice that in most situations we tend to overlook or sideline persons with disabilities because of the notion that probably they might not understand. It might be difficult for them to understand the message, but they too also are supposed to be receiving the message, just like any other person who is not physically disabled.
Absolutely. And now, looking at 16 days of activism, of course, you came here with the network, but of course, you're with WILD. What specifically are you going to be doing in your region, in places like Umzingwane, where you say your tentacles spread to? Because of course, the same message may be talking about gender-based violence, but different messaging for different places. There's no, straight jacket. There's no one message fits all. So what is your message, and how are you taking it and breaking it down to the communities with which you work?
All right, this year around, we tried by all means to ensure that we break it down according to different constituencies that we work with, from young women to established leaders, to women in the community, to women in rural areas as well. So what we did is, as I mentioned earlier, that we work with structures in different areas. In Gwanda, we've got structures. In Umzingwane, we've got structures. In Bulawayo, we've got structures. So we're utilizing those structures to implement some of the activities that we have in line. For example, we've got what we refer to as a laundry cafe. I'm sure you're wondering what a laundry cafe is pertaining to gender-based violence. What we do is we gather women, and then we discuss about issues of gender-based violence. And then, as soon as we're done, we'll be having our dirty laundry there. Like literally dirty laundry. Okay. You bring in your buckets, you bring in your laundry, your washing powder, your pegs, your washing line, and then we have the discussion. We ensure that women are as free as they can be, because the moment you bring in such a type of activity, you notice that women actually are at ease, because you're not asking too many questions. You're asking things that they really understand, things that they can relate to, things that they see on a daily basis. So what we do is, as soon as we're done with the discussion, we then take those clothes outside, and then we're like, okay, we've discussed about gender-based violence. We've discussed that, okay, gender-based violence is a social ill that needs to be dealt with. You can't just leave with that particular dirty clothing item because you're saying someone might judge me in a certain manner. Probably if I go to the police, they won't even believe my story. If I take the story to the courts, they won't even believe my story. If I try and reach out to a neighbor, they won't believe it, or probably they might even make fun of me. We wash that particular clothing item. So the thing is, each and every woman, say maybe in a group of 30 women, those women wash their different dirty clothing items, and then as soon as they're done with washing, then they go and hang those clothes. And then the process of hanging those clothes is as good as finding solutions to that particular problem that you're facing. And then as soon as they're done, they just wait a bit, and then as they're waiting, we're still having discussions. At times we even intertwine those discussions with song and dance, right? And then as soon as we're done, as soon as the clothing items are now ready for them to actually remove from the washing line, you can actually see that clothes actually dry according to the fabric. So probably if you've got lighter fabric, it can actually dry quicker than a clothing item that is heavier, maybe a jersey. So that actually symbolizes that with gender-based violence, it doesn't necessarily mean that your case cannot be solved, your situation cannot be resolved. So it actually gives hope to them that if they are facing something of that nature, they can actually deal with that.
And sometimes the length of time for something to be resolved is never the same, because you can look at somebody's case and say, well, how come this person was convicted earlier and I'm still going to the courts? But it's because your laundry is different from the next person.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, Roswitha, before we close, I want you to tell me what you're also looking forward to doing as an organization when you go back to Masvingo, when you go back into a community within these 16 days of activism against violence against women. What programs are you going to be doing?
There wouldn't be a better way of welcoming the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. You are aware that we have got this global pandemic. It is affecting all of us. And for women and girls with disability, accessing information has been a challenge. We have been locked up in our homes, and in some cases, women and girls with disabilities have been locked up with perpetrators. And what we will try and do during these 16 days of activism is to try and reach out to women and girls with disabilities so that they can find a way of speaking out, of amplifying their voices. And then we come up with strategies as to how best they can be assisted or they can be engaged during these difficult times. And I'm also saying for our 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, we are planning to conduct a survey to say with our netizens or with our social media, how best can we interact with women and girls with disabilities, depending with the disability category. How can they access, the social media is awash with information, but for women and girls with disabilities, it is difficult to engage in those virtual spaces. So what we are trying to do now is to say, how best can we also be on board and be able to be informed so that we can make informed decisions and participate effectively on the virtual platforms. And we are also going to compile, like a lessons learned as to how best women and girls with disabilities can access the virtual platforms and how best they can be supported to participate effectively and then also be able to address the challenges they are encountering, and also even to get information on how to combat, or how to guard against contracting the pandemic. There is lots of information, but with our constituency, it might be that not everyone is accessing the information, and not everyone is accessing the PPEs. Because I've seen even at our schools, we say, if you don't have a mask, you can even get a used one. With young girls, how difficult it is for you to be using a worn-out mask when everybody else is in a fancy-looking mask. So we try and support each other and strategize how best, maybe we can be innovative, participating virtually, or should we use audio notes? How best do we go about it? Just making sure that they access the information and the PPEs, and in some cases solicit for resources so that they are equally protected. Because I believe that for pandemics that are contagious, it's very important that everybody is aware of how best to prevent, so that we don't remain the carriers and spread the pandemic.
Well, before we go, I'm sorry, I'll have to make you address this real quickly, because it's something we talked about on the side. A lot of people who are able-bodied will come up with a solution and think they're doing those who are disabled a favor, and we talked about this, that maybe if it's sign language, maybe if it's subtitles, some people may be lazy to provide that service, which encompasses a lot more people. But you taught me something important, that sometimes when you come up with an intervention, it's not going to just simply help those with disabilities. It's also an advantage to those who are not disabled. And I wanted you to quickly address that and give us that wisdom, where that's coming from.
Robbie, tell you what, there are so many causes of disability. Some of them, they run within the family. Some are advantageous. That means they come to you when you are already of age. Sometimes you got involved in an accident. Now with the pandemic, we never know if you contract it, when you recover, what would happen. So I think what we need to bear in mind is that we all have got the potential to get a disability. Because for us, disability is more of barriers. There could be institutional barriers, there could be attitudinal barriers, there could be, term them economic barriers. So we believe that it's very important that whenever we do programming, let's always go for the universal design, because we never know what our future holds for us. After all, I think in my language we say sekaurema wafa. What it means is that you never know. And what it means is that you should never, ever, scorn, people with impairments. And the universal design is something which can be accessed by everyone. Talk of the ramp. For you people who are hardworking, after a long day's work, you might not want to use the stairs. You might prefer to use the ramp. So the ramp will work both for somebody who has got a physical impairment, who is a wheelchair user, who uses a crutch or something else. And then it is also useful to somebody who is tired. Or can you think of an expecting mother? Obviously, an expecting mother would rather use the ramp than the stairs. And then, sometimes they might also even need the rail, for us people who are visually impaired, sometimes we prefer to hold on to the rail so that you don't miss the stairs. So if we use the universal design, they will work for everyone. Even those who deem themselves able-bodied will find themselves making use of some of the innovations. We say they should be in place so that people can access the amenities.
Well,
After all, we have got the SDGs where we say we don't want to leave anyone behind. And I was thinking that with Agenda 2063 for African Union, one would love to see a railway line or a train which would move from Cape to Cairo, and this train would be accessed by everyone, where we have got platforms which can be accessed by everyone, because we never know. And what we do in life might sometimes just compel us to use what we think is meant for persons with disabilities, and yet it can be used by all citizens.
Okay. Well, Roswitha, I wasn't going to let you leave without telling us that. And certainly, I'm sure we've been educated. It's always unfortunate that diplomatic passport, we always have to stamp our passport at a particular point in time. There's a lot that we could have learned, and certainly a lot that we've already learned. But we will tell you that today our diplomatic passport took us to Masvingo virtually and took us to Bulawayo, and we shall also be following up on whatever interventions that they're going to be working on going forward into those 16 days of activism. Here on Diplomatic Passport, we've been around, we've been to Mutare, we've been to Victoria Falls, Bulawayo, we've been to Mzarabani. Certainly we are going places. We've been to Masvingo as well, so we shall also be shining a light all around the country to make sure that the voices of women all over the country are represented, and we represent women in all their diversity, able-bodied or otherwise, because as Roswitha said, Sekaore Mawafa, you never know when you want to use that intervention, but whether you're affected personally or affected because somebody around you all of a sudden needs that help. Well, that is all for today here on the ZTN's Diplomatic Passport. If you want to get in touch with me as we give you this rolling 16 days type of programming, of course, we've always had women at the center of our hearts, but of course now, this particular time, we're really ceding the time to them. If you've got something that you want to talk about and itching to discuss, get in touch with me on my Twitter handle. That's at Zimrobbie, that's at ZIMROBBIE, and let's get to talking, and let's make sure that this world is a beautiful place for everyone and anyone, because it is our home until we choose to leave it, or until we are selected to fly high to another place. Until tomorrow, my name is Robert Mkandiwa. Have a great day, have a great rest of the day, have a great night, and all the best.